With a half-inch bevel.
Exactly.
That's the point of it. All the trees never covered.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone, I'm thrilled to be here again at Oak Knoll and excited for all of you to join us, as well as those who will be watching the recording later on for Iowa City Foreign Relations Council program featuring IWP Fall Resident Vlora Konushevci. See? On the topic of Kosovo's cultural survival through literature and education. My name is Peter Gerlach, and I am ICFRC's Executive Director. As a reminder, but you guys don't need this reminder, we'll conclude at about 8 o'clock tonight. We are deeply grateful at the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council for the long-standing support from our community. As a small nonprofit, we exist because of the participation and support of individuals like each of you. In fact, many of our strongest advocates over the years have been or are currently Oak Knoll residents. Maybe some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your help has allowed ICFRC to continue for now 42 years, hosting speaker programs like this with experts joining us in person and online from across the world. If you're not yet a supporter and you're able to make a donation to keep our free and educational programs available over the next year, we thank you. Please see your printed programs for more information or let us know if you have any questions. We have to regularly make this impassioned pitch because these are very difficult times for nonprofit organizations like us. It is quite a climate to be in right now and do the work that we do. I also hope you'll check out the events page of our website, and there you can see more information about all our 2025 programs. If you stop up at the table afterwards, you'll see this amazing series that we are doing this fall, which we're calling Big Questions Confronting 2025. Our first program in this 4-part series was about healthcare. The second was about immigration, specifically deportation in the US. Our next one will be focused on the economy. And finally, we'll be focused on presidential power. 4 relevant topics, wouldn't you say? ICFRC would also like to give a heartfelt thank you to Peter Hansen, David Anson, Kimberly Herring, and the program committee here at Oak Knoll for their efforts to bring this program to you. And thank you to all of you for your support and for what you do in the Iowa City community. We're excited to announce that today's program is the second in a new partnership between ICFRC and Oak Knoll to host seasonal programs right here in this room. So let us know what topics or speakers you're interested in so we can bring them to you in the coming years. We're thrilled also to partner with the International Writing Program. I think all of you know what an amazing University of Iowa unit that has been for a great many years. And so I want to invite its director, Christopher Merrill, up to share a few words before I introduce our speaker. Chris?
Thank you, Peter. It's especially gratifying for me to be here with you tonight because, as I think most of you know, in February we had to announce that our nearly $1 million worth of grants from the U.S. Department of State had been terminated by the new administration. But thanks to support from people like you and angels all around America, we managed to put together a makeshift fall residency with 23 writers from 20 countries. And the fact that Vlora is here to speak with you tonight is for me particularly meaningful because the topic she is going to talk about is something I was writing about back in the 1990s when I was covering the war in the former Yugoslavia. And I know from all of my interactions with her over the last several weeks that you are in for a real treat. So thank you.
So, our speaker. Vlora is the author of the poetry collection Lavdi Vetis and the editor-translator of the bilingual anthologies Poetry Without Borders, Albanian and Serbian, and Magma, an Albanian English piece. Her poetry and translations appear in The Common, Songs of Eretz, and European Literature Network. A winner of multiple literary awards and a contributor to Kosovo's cultural press, she also works as a certified translator for national and international institutions. Her participation in the IWP's 2025 Fall Residency is made possible thanks to the University of Iowa's Office of the Vice President for Research and Graduate College. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Vlora to the stage.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for being here and for hosting me. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here in front of you and to be able to share my story and my country's story, in which your country has contributed quite. I'm going to try and now use this other microphone. I can? Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. So in order to tell you my story, I'm going to start with my country's story since the moment I was born. I was born in 1981 in Kosovo. Kosovo was then a part of Yugoslav Federation, which consisted of several republics. However, Kosovo was not a republic within the Yugoslav Federation, but it did enjoy some freedoms, though not all. Yeah. Oh, what am I doing? Are you? What's happening?
Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay.
We're good on my screen here. These are the slides.
Is that Taylor Swift?
You as a little girl.
No, Taylor Swift. That's not me. I wish. Better than writing poems.
Depends.
Yeah. Is it okay now?
Almost.
Okay, so the time I was born, 1981, students of Pristina University started huge protests all over the country, demanding dignity and equal rights. And at that time, there was a curfew. You couldn't go out after 8 o'clock, 7, I think, at night. And when my mom went into labor, my dad was protesting that day with his friends, and he came back home because before coming home, after the beating happened, he got drunk with his friends, got medicated on rakia, which is a form of brandy in our country, and then came home drunk. And when my grandmother called the ambulance, because my mom was in labor with me, my father thought that they're calling the ambulance for him. and he was completely oblivious that his wife is, in labor. Anyhow, that's how I was born, during protests in a curfew. And sometimes I feel that it has somehow marked my whole life and creative path. Here, there are some pictures from the protests in 1981. Let's see if we can... Is everything okay?
We're getting it. If you would like to advance to the next slide.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
This is Pristina, the capital, where I was born. Can I do that with this?
You will in
Oh,
1 minute.
okay.
We'll get it.
Okay. Taylor Swift has something to do with this.
I'm going to get it in
Don't worry.
1 second.
Okay,
How about that?
great.
Okay.
And the whole presentation consists of pictures so that you can get a better idea. I'm going to speak about the events and show you the pictures as well. This was also because when the protest started in March 1981, they didn't stop, they continued for like throughout the year. Even though our students were joined by other groups, by old people, by young people, and then they just grew. I'm sorry for the quality, because when they get big, I guess the quality. I don't know if you can see the police brutality here. This is a favorite picture of mine. Here was a man protesting. He was in his maybe late 50s, peacefully sitting there. And after this picture was taken by a very famous photograph of Kosovo, Albanian, Hazireka, who also worked for Associated Press and Reuters and all the big platforms. After this picture was taken, he was beaten, and he was dragged out of the street. However, now, almost 30 years later, no, 40, because I'm 44. Last year, I believe, this happened. A student of arts made a sculpture, and that sculpture was put in the same place where he was sitting and protesting from that iconic picture that you just saw. This is Pristina today. But before I go here, let's stay here with this good moment for a while. After that, I started my primary school, and we were taught together with the Serbian kids. Even though they were a minority, we were like 93% in the country and in the schools, and our birth rate was sky high, because there's a saying in Albanian that we were expelled from schools and from factories and from everything, and then the only thing that remained was to make love. That's why we made a lot of kids. But I'll come back to that. When I was in my 3rd grade, I still remember when our schools got segregated. Because our autonomy was revoked. During the autonomy, we had more or less some rights to be at least educated in our mother tongue, to be able to have our own TV in Albanian language, to have newspapers in Albanian language, books as well, and the curriculum, which was the most important thing. However, in 1987, our autonomy was revoked by Milosevic, who was at the time the president of Yugoslavia. And when that happened, I was in the 3rd grade, and I still remember my teacher coming outside of the school and like guiding us to a side door of the school. So from that day, we weren't supposed to use the main entrance. We had to go through the side and to the basement, where we were going to be taught for the next like 5 or 6 years until that was finished. While the Serbian kids, even though minority, got the upper part of the school where it was sunnier and the air was better and everything else. That happened after that in the 90s. Sometime after the school segregation and everything, the Kosovo high school students got poisoned. Up to 8,000 of them were poisoned within a week. It was said that Belgrade called that a mass hysteria. However, there were tests done, and the tests showed that that was nerve gas poisoning. These are some pictures that I could find of the high school kids at the time. This is how it's turned into schools. And after the high school poisoning, we refused to go in the segregated schools. as it was dangerous for us. So what we did was we started building a completely parallel system to the state system, which anyway didn't want us in. We built a parallel education system. Albanians at the time, the ones who had like more than one house, but even those who had only one house, they let one room or two rooms be used for schools, as makeshift schools, the word you used. Makeshift schools for Albanian students and high school students. And more than 400,000 Albanian students ended up in makeshift schools during those years, the 90s. When that happened, also Albanians who used to work in factories, plants, television, hospitals, lawyers, they were all expelled from state institutions. And at that time, there were no private institutions because that was like a socialist communist system. And private, as it is here, it really didn't exist back then in our country. There were some small stores and some trading, but that was all there was. And all of a sudden, my people, we remained out of jobs, out of schools, out of information, because also one of the most important and the main newspaper, we called it the Press Tower, as it was a tower at the time, got also closed. My father worked there. And we had to start from the beginning, and we also had to build a health system. What helped us was our diaspora. Because in the 90s, when all of that happened, and even before that, I have my own uncle who migrated in Sweden in 1985. And a lot of Albanians migrated to Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, and the US. And they created a 3% fund. They gave 3% of their proceeds for the Albanian cause. And that money came back home, which supported our health system and education system and information and everything. We even held elections. We had the government in the country and in exile. These are some of the pictures of the makeshift schools. This one is from the BBC. We didn't really have books at the time, but the teachers had books, and they would explain, give a lecture, and sometimes they would dictate the most important things so that we could take record of them in our notebooks. And this is something also interesting I wanted to share here with you. This is a book by a wonderful writer and a friend, Rezarta Reka Thaci. She held a diary during the whole time. And last year, she published her diary. But last year, what happened in the book fair, a lot of my generation published things about the oppression in the 90s. And it came out just last year. I guess people need quite a long time to digest and face when bad things happen to them. So this is one of the books. Those are the shoes. Like an illustration of the house makeshift schools where you had to leave your shoes outside and go inside even though it was quite cold. This is Rilinja, the press tower. Even the letters up were removed, so there was no Rilinja anymore. Rilinja means Renaissance, and they were replaced by TAN, which was a Serbian publishing house, I believe, or maybe a journal or newspaper, I don't remember. But I remember that at that time, Albanians that you used to see them in like doctors' white coats or in suits, overnight they became taxi drivers, farmers. They were forced to like sell in the market or wash cars for a living. And that was really difficult for everyone. But even though attempts to erase us and our identity did not stop, we somehow survived and created even. This is a bad picture, sorry. It says Dodona. Dodona is an Albanian name from, it used to be a name of a princess. And theater. This was a private theater, privately funded. Then we started with the private things, which was also an act of rebellion. And here we had shows almost every night, mostly comedies, which really lifted our spirits, because this is one of the main characteristics, I believe, in the whole Balkans, that you go on through life by just making jokes and just having fun with even the dark things. This is Dodona Theater as well, one of the shows. And then this was a coffee bar. Since we couldn't develop our cultural life and the institutions anymore, the cultural life was developed in coffee bars, and we still have that somehow. We still go to coffees and read poems and books, and even though we do have institutions now. This lady here, she's Edi Shukriu. She was an IWP resident in 2005. Unfortunately, she's not alive anymore, but here she was promoting, I believe, one of her books in this coffee bar, which was called Hani dy Roberdve, which in English would be Inn of Two Roberts. And here people would promote their books, read poems, then they would paint and they would show their paintings. Sometimes it served as a gallery, sometimes it served as a theater, sometimes as just a hall where people read and got creative. And embargo recipes. We all have them, at least in the Balkans, because when the war started, before, you are probably familiar, but before Kosovo, Serbia started the war with Slovenia, then Croatia, then Bosnia, and then Kosovo. But while the other wars were going on, Serbia was under UN sanctions, so nothing could be imported or exported. And then there was the inflation of the currency, like the ones who worked and were paid in local currency. I remember my power and water. And I have a book that she left it to me. I hope I'm not going to need that ever. And then, prior to protests in 1997, in 1996, Milosevic, with the mediation of international community, made a deal with our leader, Dr. Ibrahim Rugova, to let us get back to our schools and institutions. However, that promise was not kept. And by 1997, just the frustration was through the roof, and people just couldn't, get through with it anymore. And even the New York Times wrote about these protests, and the article said that the barrier of fear is broken. Like, nobody was even afraid anymore, because we just had enough. I was a teenager. I did go to protests every day, and I still wonder how my mother allowed that. I would never allow my son to do that today. But at that time, I don't know how their brains functioned. I mean, it wasn't forbidden, it was even encouraged, and they just gave us onions, peeled onions. They filled our pockets with peeled onions so that we could breathe through the tear gas, and that was it. We could have gone beaten and imprisoned, but I'm here. Nothing happened. These were the protests of 1997. Peaceful ones, even though the police used tear gas. They even used these plastic bullets? Rubber bullets, yes. Oh, sorry. This was held in Velania. It's like a hill, so escaping was a bit difficult because you had to run up. The protests didn't stop. They continued through the whole 1997, 1998, but in 1997, the war had already started in some parts of Kosovo. People were killed, houses were burned. This was also one of the protests, and these white sheets, I guess you all know that they express peaceful resolution. And then I don't have the pictures of the war here because I don't think anyone needs to see that. War happened in 1999, through March and April, maybe February, March, April, almost 1 million of Kosovo Albanians were deported. They were expelled from their houses. They were boarded onto trains or trucks or buses, and some of us were sent to Macedonia, and some of us were sent to Albania. While they were expelling us, I still remember they were saying, "Go to your homeland, go to Albania, this is not your homeland." And here is Bill Clinton with the refugees, who was president at the time. These are some pictures of the refugees from the 1999. And then the NATO intervention, the NATO troops. Serbia was bombed for, I think, almost 80 days because they didn't want to reach a peace agreement with the international community for Kosovo to stop the genocide. And after, I think, 78 days of bombing, they finally withdrew and made a deal. This is when NATO ground forces entered Kosovo. And they were expected with a lot of love as the ones who brought freedom, even though Kosovo also had a small army, Kosovo Liberation Army, which fought and cooperated with NATO as well. NATO troops coming into Kosovo. Everyone was throwing flowers to them. This is also an interesting picture because this guy, even though when the pictures get so big, they don't really look okay. This guy was in Jakova, that's a city in Kosovo, and he was in a basement and he was beaten a couple of times, so he was really afraid to go out and he didn't have a clue what was going on. He heard some noises and he heard voices of children, and then he just, peeked a little bit to see what's happening. And one child saw him and said, "Come, come, freedom is here, come, come." And he couldn't believe. And when he saw when he saw NATO troops, he jumped into a moving vehicle. This is a real picture that was taken by a driver of a NATO, I don't know what kind of vehicle it was, and he was kissing the vehicle. There's a video of this somewhere. And our monument, the newborn, because we are the newest state in Europe. We declared our independence in 2008, even though there is still a number of countries that doesn't recognize us. And we built our state. We have our own institutions now. We even have our own police force, our own army. We have a lot of cultural life going on. We have international poetry festivals, one of which is here. Polyp Fiction Fest, which is also international, and it brings a lot of interesting authors back home. We also have classical music. Sunny Hill Festival. Sunny Hill Festival is the most famous. The young ones probably know it. I've never been there myself. It's organized by Dua Lipa. Dua Lipa is an Albanian singer who lives in London. And she brought this big festival in Kosovo. And every year we get like more than 1 million visitors during this festival. They come from all over the world. Some pictures of the festival. This is Shawn Mendes, I guess some famous singer. This is Dua Lipa with her father singing. Her father was also a singer, so they are singing together a song in Albanian. Why is this not moving? There is another important picture that I want to share with you. But this thing is not moving for some reason. Huh? I am.
Or on the keyboard.
No, something, I don't know.
I think Dua Lipa makes time stand still.
Just like What was the name of the previous one who popped up on the screen all the time? Taylor Swift, yeah.
There we go, try it now.
Yes. I believe this is the woman my nation owes everything to. The Secretary of the State, Madeleine Albright. Yes, and I read her autobiography, and I also read Tony Blair's autobiography, who was the Prime Minister of UK at the time. And everything that she did, how much she pushed for NATO interventions, for ground troops, and having been a refugee herself, I suppose her feelings and empathy was different, and having witnessed what happened in Bosnia, especially in Srebrenica, where they had 8,000 men and children, male children killed. She didn't want, I read that she didn't want to have another Srebrenica, and she didn't want to allow Milosevic to go through with another genocide. And yeah, to Madeleine Albright, whose courage and conviction turned history's hesitation into action. Kosovo remembers, and I remember. She also has a statue at the center of Pristina. We also have a statue of President Bill Clinton, and we have a square of President George Bush, because Bill Clinton was president when the genocide and the war stopped, and George Bush was the president when we got our independence. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for America and America's intervention, even after the war in state building and everything else. Yeah, and I was told that I need to make another slide just to show what people can do here to support causes like ours. Thankfully, we are doing well, not as well as we wish, but still, we're getting there. We're still in our teenage years as a state. These are some of the sites and NGOs you can donate if you wish to support Ukraine or Gaza, Palestine, who are going through unimaginable situations with which I believe you're all familiar. And that's it. Thank you.
Now we'll do some questions. How do we do the mic now?
Yeah, I'll just turn this
Okay.
off real quick and then,
And we can get this off.
yeah, we can just
Okay.
take it off. Yeah,
All right.
there we go. Perfect, thank you. And I'll bring up a handheld mic in a second.
Okay.
So, but you're welcome to speak in there first if you'd like to get started.
Thank you, Vlora. Wonderful presentation. Just for local knowledge, it might be interesting to note that that NATO adventure, if you will, resulted in no casualties for NATO, not a single casualty. And the commander of the troops at the time was Wesley Clark, who announced his candidacy for the US president at Hamburg Inn in 2004. And just because it's kind of funny to say this, I got a call the night before that he would be doing this at Hamburg Inn, and I couldn't go because I had to go to work. But my wife got there, and as usual, she was late, and she arrived with our infant daughter just as Wesley Clark was getting out of his car. And so the first baby he kissed was our daughter. And she started crying, so we knew his candidacy was doomed. And Vlora, I'm glad you noted the funding sites for both Ukraine and Gaza. The Ukrainian writer we had in residence this fall was funded in part by Razom, by a former American diplomat, poet and translator we worked with quite a lot, reached out to us when everybody was getting fired at the State Department. She took a job at Razom and has been part of the effort to keep things going in Ukraine. And so we'll open it up with questions. We'll go around with the microphone. Does anybody have anything pressing? Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could say something more about the coffee shops and the poetry readings and so forth, and how that all sort of developed and where that came from, because that strikes me as both grassroots but also art, and just be interested in hearing more about that.
Thank you. That's truly a beautiful question. I was a teenager at the time, a kid and a teenager, but I was dragged by my parents to coffee bars because my father was also a journalist, but he was a poet. And when I started writing poetry, my sister would say, "Isn't one poet per family tragic enough? What the hell are you doing?" But I guess I was influenced as I was dragged into coffee bars and even slept there because they would stay until past midnight, very late. And a lot of cultural life, Kosovo's cultural life developed there. They exchanged ideas there. They developed ideas there. And then there were poetry readings. There were even the literary criticism was quite strong at the time. It's amazing how erasure attempts were coming from all sides, and we were yet able to create even more than we do now in freedom. There were not a lot of coffee bars who did this. There was Hani di Robertve, then there was Fiala. There were actually 3 famous ones, where poets, painters, philosophers, they even had debates there on various topics. And then the audience would also participate. A lot of our nation building, parallel nation building, developed in those coffee bars as well, apart from the arts and literature.
I think first and then to you.
I believe Iowa has a special relationship to
It does.
Kosovo.
Yes, we are sister states.
I know the chemistry department here, one of our IT guys, part of the National Guard, spent a year in Kosovo, and so I don't know if they were a part of that original NATO group or not, but in later years, the National Guard from Iowa spent time in Kosovo.
Yes, Iowa and Kosovo are sister states, and Iowa has helped us a lot in training our army officers and giving them an education. A lot of Kosovo cadets completed their military education here, for which we are forever grateful, and we have excellent relations. I myself am not part of that. I came here as a writer with an international writing program, for which I am thankful. But I enjoy the relation that the 2 states have.
Yeah. Thank you. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your personal life and when you decided you wanted to be a writer and how that fit in with what was going on in your country.
I think there's a time in everyone's life when we try to write poems. For me, it was when I was 15 and 16, when I thought I was in love. And I believe everyone has such a story. However, I developed it. And after the war, I got my 18th birthday while we were in a refugee camp in Vlora. And I always had this naive idea that I will have a really great birthday party when I'm 18. I was very much influenced by American culture. I was watching Beverly Hills, listening to MTV, watching Friends. And I don't know how I was so naive to believe that I could have a party when the war was going on. However, after that, when we came back home, I started working with international journalists, war correspondents. When I met the first correspondent, he worked for the Times. He still does. He's in Ukraine now. I met him on the street, and he asked me several questions in English and then asked me if I could translate for him. I said, no, I cannot translate. I don't know English, and my English was more or less basic just from the movies and the music and some Hemingway reading. And then I told him I have to ask my father, and he came with me to ask my father if I can work, because that was the culture back then. And my father said, if you want, the pay was really good, and none of my parents worked. Everything was destroyed. So I did that. And then I started writing about everything I saw. I was 18, as I said. It was not easy getting all the testimonies from all the massacres and everything that had happened. And then I started writing. But still, to this day, somehow, I still haven't written a poem or a short story which is completely made up. Everything I write has a tiny bit of truth somewhere that sleeps in me, which I gathered during my years of work with the international community as well.
As somebody who hired lots of people like Vlora when I was covering the war, we call them fixers. They were absolutely invaluable to the Western journalist's job of telling the story of what was going on. I treasure my friendships from those days. Other questions for Vlora? I think.
Vlora, thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I was thinking as you were talking that in this period, in the late 90s, I was a teenager, and I was going to school in Wisconsin, sitting in my classroom and learning. And I recall my parents were very much, people that would watch PBS and listen to NPR, and they were up on the headlines, and so I would see what was happening in this other part of the world, a region I didn't know much about at that age. And I'm sort of thinking about those photos that you showed us of the schools in homes. And my question is, what types of things did you have access to? You said the teachers had books. And I'm wondering, I'm a young person, and I take for granted I have all these different subjects. I'm going to room, all these different classes. And your schooling years were much different. Would you share a little bit about the different things that your teachers, not only that they had, but they felt were really important for you to be learning in those challenging times?
Thank you. That's a great question. We didn't really have access to anything. I mean, I had a lot of books at home. As I said, my parents were, my father was a journalist and a poet, but most of our books were translated. The masterpieces, literature masterpieces, we had them translated into Serbian. And I did read and speak Serbian, and I had access to maybe more than my peers. But as a generation, we didn't really have access to much. We had access to pencils and notebooks, and sometimes, which this was there was this magazine in Serbian language. It was called Huper, but it was so expensive. I mean, expensive for the time, because it probably wasn't. And if someone could get their hands on that, then we would all share that magazine just to learn about what's happening with the actors and the musicians. And we also had access to this video recording store where you go to borrow a movie at the time to play it on the video. And whoever had money to do that, they would watch the movie first, but then that movie would be circulated in the whole neighborhood. So we would all watch it within 24 hours. The solidarity was amazing at the time. And yeah, we didn't really have access to much, but we weren't really aware. Now when I think about it, when I tell my own children, they're like, that's cringe, they say.
What were the subjects that your teachers most wanted you to
History. History was the main one, I guess. history and Albanian language and literature, because the reason why we went out of the system was because the curricula was decided in Belgrade, and it had no references to Albanian culture, language, literature, history, music, nothing. That's why our teachers made a new curriculum with which they taught us. We were taught all subjects: history, geography, music. I was in a gymnasium. Physical education wasn't really important. We did that because we had to walk like 4 or 5 kilometers to arrive there and go back and forth. The jokes that they now make, how long we walked, our kids. And that's about it. We were taught all the subjects, but the most important ones, I guess, for my gymnasium, it was a philological one. I was taught languages. I was taught English, German, Albanian, language and literature, and then social sciences. But in a different gymnasium, for example, a science one, maths, physics, chemistry, Albanian language and history, they were always the most important. You're welcome. We did. We had television. There were only 3 channels in Serbian. We did not have television in Albanian language. But then, after the expulsion from the schools and the state institutions and everything, people needed some time to get back on their feet. And afterwards, whoever could, bought these, they were called satellites, like real ones, with which we would watch German channels, French, English, the BBC, and so on. But not in Albanian. We didn't have any channel in Albanian at the time. We did not have access to the Albanian TV in Albania, as they were under their communist regime by Enver Hoxha, who was equally terrible to his own people. So
after Hoxha died, Albanians started directing their satellites or their dishes toward Italy. Yes. And in the TV they saw coming from Italy, they had glimpses of a different kind of life, and it was widely thought that that was what led eventually to Albania declaring its independence from the communist Politburo.
Mm-hmm,
right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah.
You've gone through quite an experience, and I appreciate your story. How do you answer, as I've been told, someone in America who simply says, yes, but it can't happen here?
I'm sorry to say that it can happen anywhere. It happened, even in quite developed countries. Again, I don't want really to talk about it, but when Hitler came in power, he wasn't really taken seriously. People were making jokes. He was a kind of a clown. And then what happened? Yeah, this was all before the internet. But I've got fluent in internet as well now. If you wish, I can read my poem for you. When I came here in the States, I started writing in English. This because I write in Albanian, which is my mother tongue, and English is like my 4th language. But I started writing in English because America became a subject for me. I'm just going to take my phone quickly. The poem I want to share with you deals with Iowa City and my grandmother, who was a wonderful woman. Yeah. 2 hours in Iowa City, still stuck on one comma. The professor calls it lyrical, like that's enough reason to suffer. My grandmother hovers over my shoulder, furious that I traded a day of life for a dot of ink. She traded a fist of coffee for 3 bottles of cough syrup and taught herself strange currencies and tricks in foreign languages. Once, she stirred mercury into cream and sold it in pill bottles. And here I am, eating a $20 salad, while the faculty debate whether a metaphor should be extended or restrained. She would slam the table and ask why no one tries restraining hunger instead of metaphors. And what the fuck is this, $12 for a lettuce? $20, sorry. She would walk Clinton Street like it was a bazaar, barking at neon signs, asking why Americans wait for sales instead of demanding lower prices. Once she told the neighbor his fence was crooked, and when he measured, it was. Meanwhile, I wait for a cashier to ask if I want 10% off, thinking how she once bribed a border officer with a handful of salt. Both of us saying yes, always yes, because yes is the whole story of survival. So blame her suspicion of easy praise, her refusal to pray to a God that never punched the clock, her blistered hands while mine just tap at keys. Blame her for the way I walk, as if the world might vanish if I stopped, for the paper I carry and the commas I scratch at. And yes, blame her, please, for the ghost I keep feeding with everything I fail to finish. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Vlora, for your excellent presentation today and for your excellent questions in the audience. We sincerely hope to see you at our next ICFRC Oak Knoll program right here in this room. So stay tuned for that. And like I said earlier, if there are topics that you all really want to hear about, we want to hear from you so that we can bring you exactly the types of conversations you want to have here. With that, I thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.